Launched in 2018, the global commitment is led by the MacArthur Foundation in collaboration with the UN Environment Programme. Through the global commitment, businesses and governments commit to change on how plastics is produced, reused and reused. Today marks the launch of the 2021 Global Commitment Report. My name is Elisabeth Skoda. I'm one of the editors at Packaging Europe, and with me today is Elisabeth, who is Program Manager in New Plastics Economy at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. She'll discuss some of the key findings of this year's report with me. Welcome, Lily, and thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Elisabeth. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So I was wondering, looking at the new report on a broad level, what are the key areas of progress identified within the report, and which areas would you say need a bit more work?
Yeah, so in terms of progress highlights, the big one really for us has been about reduction in virgin plastic in packaging. So major finding of the report is that for the group of brands and retailers we have in the global commitment, it looks like their use of virgin plastic in packaging might have actually peaked. So that's a major milestone, obviously. So firstly, we've now seen a fairly small but absolute reduction in each of the last 2 years in terms of their use of virgin plastic in packaging. And then the other thing is that this year in the global commitment, we've actually introduced reduction targets as a new mandatory requirement to be a brand or a retail signatory of the global commitment. And we're actually expecting those to drive a total decrease of almost 20% between 2018 and when we started in 2025, when our targets run to. That obviously follows decades of exponential growth in the consumption of virgin plastics by the industry. So that feels significant. And then in terms of where else are we seeing big progress? Well, one of the very strong drivers for that virgin reduction is actually the strong growth in recycled content. So we've seen about 30% plus 30% growth for the second year in a row for our signatories. So we've gone from about 5% across the group weighted average in 2018 to just over 8% in 2020. So again, that's really substantial. And very positive, just a couple of years after they've set these targets. In terms of what we're not seeing enough of, really it's efforts to design out the need for single-use packaging altogether. So we know that we can't recycle our way out of plastics pollution. If you look at the future scenarios involving recycling and disposal alone, they've been shown to result in higher annual leakage, also actually higher greenhouse gas emissions. So to really tackle plastic pollution and achieve a circular economy for plastics, we actually are going to need to reduce the total amount of material that is moving through the system. So what that means is that we need our signatories and the rest of the industry to look beyond simply substituting one plastic for another, or perhaps substituting from plastics to paper, to look at how can we use reuse and other elimination solutions to fundamentally redesign the packaging or the product or in fact the business model to design out the need for single-use packaging altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like there's some great progress being made, but some work still needs to be done. Last year's report identified that substantial acceleration of progress will be needed in the coming years, especially in the area of the move to recyclable plastics and also shifting to reusable packaging, as you just alluded to in your previous answer as well. Has there been any progress made on this?
Yeah, so I'll take reuse first. So on one level, we do see more progress. So if you look at the number of pilots of reuse models that have been reported by our signatories, which we take as a pretty good indicator of kind of early engagement with reuse, that's gone up year on year by about 50%, which is obviously substantial. So we had about 100 in total reported last year, and it's 150 this year. So that's positive. And it's also in a year when we had significant disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic, which we know delayed some plans. So it was good to see that. On the other hand, the overall proportion of reusable packaging does remain extremely low. It's still less than 2%, and it actually fell marginally between 2019 and 2020. Again, we think that some of that is about the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused some quite significant volume shifts for our signatories between products, and in some cases away from those that use reuse models. But and I guess the other thing is we know that these changes take time. There's just fundamental changes that are required for moving towards reuse models. So we know that takes time. But I think what we're more concerned about is that the efforts we are seeing on reuse don't really go far enough. So even for the businesses who are piloting, for many of these are pretty small scale efforts. So perhaps 1 or 2 pilots focused on very few markets or a couple of product lines. And then actually for a substantial proportion of our signatories, actually over 50%, they're not engaging in pilots at all. So we'll really need to see all of them, the ones that are already piloting and the ones that aren't at all, take a big step up in terms of the focus and the investment that they're making in reuse models if we want to see this translate to change at scale in the next few years.
Yes, hopefully we'll see a bit more action in the coming years, especially in the area of reuse. I was wondering, climate change and global heating are now at the forefront of everybody's mind. Do you have any thoughts on how the findings in the reports relate to the subject of tackling climate change?
Yeah, so the production of and disposal of plastics emits around 1 billion tonnes of CO2 equivalent per year. That's the same as the entire airline industry in a normal year. And a circular economy for plastics has been shown to have potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their production use and after use by at least 25% by 2040, compared with a sort of business as usual scenario. So the global commitment and its 500 signatories and all its targets, that it exists to try and move us towards a sort of shared vision of a circular economy for plastics. And so in that sense, the progress made on all these targets that we measure in the report does constitute progress towards that end goal. But one more specific impact we've been able to calculate this year is that through that combination of those new reduction targets that I mentioned that our signatories have adopted, as well as the recycled content targets that they already have and the wider group has set, we think that around 8 million metric tonnes of virgin plastics will be avoided by 2025. And that would translate to about 13 million tonnes of CO2 emissions avoided, which is fairly significant by itself. And when you consider that we did cover 20% of the plastic packaging market, so that's a significant proportion, but also there's 80% outside. If you were to sort of extend the efforts of our signatory group across the market, you can sort of really see the potential of changing how we make and use plastics to contribute to alleviating the challenge on CO2 emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all connected, isn't it? Finally, I was wondering, what are the calls to action for businesses and governments?
Yeah, so we made 4 calls to action in last year's progress report, and actually the calls we make today aren't dissimilar to those. So for businesses, there are 2. Quite simply, one, join our signatories in setting reduction targets. So setting absolute targets to reduce the amount of total plastic or virgin plastic in packaging. We see those as really now the kind of new normal for what should be expected of a business trying to actively tackle the challenges around plastics. And then secondly, to really step up that focus, as I said, and investment on solutions to design out the need for single-use packaging altogether. So those are the 2 for businesses. For governments, again, the MacArthur Foundation sees 2 big priorities for the years ahead. And both of these relate to the fact that while voluntary initiatives have a massive role to play in driving change, like the global commitment, and showing what's possible, they are by their nature voluntary. So we cover 20%, there's 80% of the market outside that. And we feel policy really has potential to help capture that remaining 80%, to help align governments in an approach to support them, and also sort of level the playing field for businesses who are showing leadership versus those outside. So the first call to action for governments is to really capitalise on this very unique opportunity we see in the next year to build on momentum towards a global treaty on plastics. So we've seen substantial support from the business community now for that, and we have around 100 countries who've explicitly expressed support for starting negotiations on a global agreement in 2022. So really trying to capitalise on that momentum next year. Secondly, it's about the rollout of EPR, so extended producer responsibility policy for packaging. Again, we've had now substantial expression of support from the business community, more than 100 leading businesses explicitly publicly recognising that that's the only proven way to ensure sufficient funding for collecting, sorting and recycling packaging. And so governments can really hopefully build on this very strong signal to accelerate that implementation of the policy. And actually we've seen 8 out of 9 of the governments, the national governments who report to the global commitment have already indicated that they have set or are planning to implement those policies by 2025.
Looks like the report contains some great news, with virgin plastics likely having peaked and use set to fall. And obviously there's still a lot of work to be done, especially in the area of single-use and reusables, but it looks like we're on the right course. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing your insights with me today, Lily.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
If you'd like more insights in sustainability and the packaging industry, make sure you join us for our virtual Sustainable Packaging Summit, where we have regular panel discussions and interviews on a range of sustainability topics, including a panel discussion featuring the Ellen MacArthur Foundation discussing the UN Global Treaty next January. Thank you.